Damas y caballeros, por favor, tomen sus asientos. Nuestro evento iniciará en pocos minutos. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our show is about to begin. Thank you.
Buenos días, señoras y señores.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please do take a seat. Our event is about to start. Again, good morning. Please, ladies and gentlemen, do take a seat. The conference is about to start.
Muy buenos días.
Very good morning. My name is Claudia Espino. I am introducer, anchor person in television and journalist. The UNDP and CAF are organizing this first yearly conference about governance in Latin America in New York in the framework of the high level week of the 78th General Assembly of the United Nations. UNDP has built a space to think and reflect about policies for governance and how to design institutional, social, and political conditions that would allow our countries to reach the goals of the sustainable agenda until 2030. We have a dialogue space with very diverse speakers. Before leaving the floor, we are inviting you from right now to share your view on hashtag conference on governance and to follow at agenda CAF and at UNDP ALC on Facebook and former Twitter and also Instagram. We are broadcasting live in three languages: Spanish, English, and Portuguese from CAF.com and from the CAF YouTube channel. So we will have Madam Michelle Mouchet, Regional Director from Latin America and the Caribbean in the UNDP. She will address the welcoming words. So, Madam, you have the floor. Dear Christian, Vice President, Corporate Vice President for Strategic Programming in CAF, an ally profoundly convinced of this joint efforts to intensify the experience between governance and human development. Laura Chinchilla, Jorge, Susana, Gerardo, and our dear Isabel, who will be moderating this panel, will be very honored to count on all of you for this discussion. Thank you very much for accepting this invitation to this event, that it is extremely important and is more than an event for us. It's a commitment, a joint commitment of CAF and UNDP to develop all of the possibilities that the region has. Authorities, members of the diplomatic body, colleagues of the UNPD, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. When we suggested with CAF the setting up of the yearly conference of governments and governance and a series of regional dialogue, our main motivation was the immediate need to recognize, acknowledge, and make progress in understanding the interdependence between governance and human development. Though many of you may remember this link between governance and human development, which is nothing new, there are new challenges in our region that require new logistics of social justice. The first report on democracy in Latin America, published by UNDP in 2004, with the contribution of Gerardo as part of the teams involved, did raise a sentence that is straight very much on today. If human development entails the increase of options for human beings to improve their lives, democracy is human development counting on public, increasing the collective options, having an impact on the quality of our lives. And human development is a process of expansion, real freedom that our peoples do need, and it becomes a definition of democracy. With the publication of this report, with the UNDP, we started a long standing strategy with different methodologies accompanied by different partners to create political analysis, collective dialogue, democratic dialogue, increase of public policies, strengthening institutions, and opening up dialogue, political dialogue processes, always within a legal framework and the UN framework. 20 years later, a large majority of the consequences of these efforts are still updated. And yet, the place to be placed, but region Latin America and the Caribbean has changed. Decades of progress, democratic consolidation have brought up a reduction of poverty, improvement of human development, increase of welfare, growth, economic growth, all of it on the go. As regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean in the UNDP, I am sharing with you our firm commitment to continue to build and consolidate this pathway of UNDP in governance and development. We have produced reports, and new challenges will come up as a process, a wide, inclusive process of cooperation to which we are all invited to participate. Dear friends, the present crisis of governance in the region is, in essence, a development crisis. Sustainable development cannot happen without peace, social justice, equal opportunity. Structural challenges. The region features high level of inequalities, vulnerability, poverty. All of these have made Latin American and the Caribbean disproportionately affected by the impact of those crises. Lack of capacity, lack of response to citizens' demand is undermining the trust on public administration, thus giving rise to social um, levels of disagreement in the population affecting the region and thus creating a profound crisis of governance. This took us to a political polarization with no precedent in the region, becoming the second region most polarized in the world in just 20 years. Such degree of polarization gets societies away from their true capacity to increase opportunities and the right conditions for human development and plurality. All of that is in the last report that was published in 2023. The percentage of people in the region who didn't ch- choose democracy as the preferred choice went back from 60 to 40%. In general, according to that agreement, we women are the most unsatisfied with democracy, 70%, and people of low income as well. As an average, 79% of the population in the region believes that the way the governments are governing the countries are favoring inequalities. This opens up the floor for populism and lack of democracy, organized crime, drug trafficking, and institution crisis. At the same time, we are acknowledging the crisis in our region and also the opening of new opportunities for development. And this is why we're here today. Latin America and the Caribbean continue to be the third most democratic region after Western Europe and North America. It's the most diverse region. This means a huge potential to convert all of these opportunities into a truly inclusive, sustainable, and resilient development. This would only be possible through effective governance, supporting people, and people oriented governance. From UNDP and CAF, we believe in dialogue, contrast of ideas, and new opportunities for development in the region. It is crucial to add value to space, to policies, dialogue, entailing a number of stakeholders. We acknowledge that the challenges and the opportunities we're facing are not the exclusive responsibility of the government,
consensos entre instituciones y poderes públicos.
and they should be tackled from the institutions together with civil society, academia, private section, political parties, the media as well, thus achieving a collective effort in the region and, of course, taking into account the voice of our women, the minorities normally excluded from dialogue processes. We are convinced that it is only through dialogue that we can minimize confrontation, political polarization, and generate the social, economic, political, and institutional conditions allowing us to walk towards sustainable development. I'd like to be very clear about something that I believe is crucial: respect for the rule of law, democracy, and human rights are not a barrier for the institutions and political decision, but rather a preconditions for this to be true and sustainable. Dear friends, this yearly conference on governance and development we are opening up today for us is not just one event, one more event. It's a committed support from UNDP and CAF to consolidate an inclusive dialogue, discussion of ideas, and inclusion, finding solutions to write a new chapter in the history of democracy in Latin America and the Caribbean region, acknowledging that effective governance is a key ingredient for social contract to increase the freedom of people, allowing for the right environment for sustainable development to make progress. I'd like to thank once again CAF for their opening up and for this interest in consolidating strategic alliances for sustainable development in the region. I'd like to thank for your sharing the relevance of effective governance for development, the need to open up spaces for collective inclusion, like what we're doing today. I'd like to thank you for supporting this series of dialogues, plural, inclusive dialogues, which will allow us to face the development of the region, taking a new approach in social contract that will be solid and robust. Before I conclude, I'd like to thank the whole team who was involved with commitment and professionalism in this organizing, allowing to transform an idea into a tangible reality. It's wonderful when we are passionate about our work and we make it happen. And it's more than a job. Patricio, Sofia, Juan Fernando, and other colleagues from CAF or UNDP, Jairo, the governance team, Claudia, and the partnership team, Diego, Pablo, all of these people, Almudena, of course, our economist, and of course, Claudia, who made it possible, who made the impossible possible and got us all together here. I'd like to wish you all a passionate, enriching event that will get us all motivated. I encourage you from your different viewpoints, standpoints, make contribution to this new dialogue in the region. When we work together, we are able to achieve significant progress, strengthening our union. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a usted también, señora Mouchet.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Mouchet. Now we have Christian Asinelli, who is the I have my phone on. A very good day to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a challenge to speak after Michelle because she's expressing a very difficult situation, but it's a pleasure to work in this first edition of the annual conference. And this came from an idea in a workshop that Michelle was leading. And I take advantage of this moment to send all of my greetings to this team. And and this is something that he would have liked to be present. We believe profoundly that democracy is the way to live together, and the efforts that we must make. All of the citizens in South America and the Caribbean we have created this space with UNDP, and we'd like to thank you, Michelle. We know as the director for Latin America and the Caribbean, she has given a renewed vision to all the work that we were doing. And this has helped us tremendously to give a new point of view and how to proceed towards the future in alliance, in qualitative, measurable efforts, and not losing time, but to clearly connect the UNDP and CAF. This union is very important. And greetings to all of all of the academics and the people involved, so that we can have a renewed vision about CAF. And our own experience might come late, but I am thanking Laura because of the knowledge and the experience that you have will illuminate the way ahead. As Michelle said, the reports that are coming from a very long time ago are key to be able to consolidate sustainable development from New York to Argentina, and the work that all of the international leaders are carrying out now. What I think Michelle said was very important. These are very difficult conversations, and we have to have the courage and the boldness to make this visible, make these themes visible, and to have clear discussions. These conferences and the ideas that we're sharing are leading towards teamwork. And since Michelle arrived, we have seen changes, and we're all interested and dedicated. The concept of governance is a key point, and we must pay very close attention to it in the framework of political and social change. Just as Michelle so well expressed, how are our countries really doing? And we have the great responsibility to generate these spaces for dialogue, to change the tendencies that need to be transformed, and transform the hot discussions into solutions. And we also need to report the capacity of the states. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for us to rise above this vicious circle. And the other point that's very important is to work so that the democracy does not break down. We need for our citizens to have a democracy, and they need to see it as a solution. And we need to create the conditions for it to be a solution. And that there is not a negative view towards democracy. And we need to develop all of this. So we're accompanying all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean in technology, and the officials that are in charge, the quality of life that are and the whole society that's in permanent transformation. And we need to be able to change things as we go forward. We need fluidity and generate the conditions that are creative and flexible, because this is what the countries are asking for. We need to rise to this capacity. And right within the framework of these ideas, we had a meeting in Buenos Aires with the group, and they generated a dialogue of this type. And one of the points they brought up that we thought was very interesting, they wrote a column, opinion column in the main newspaper in the country. Uh, it's a debate that comes back to the same agenda over and over. What is it that we are doing together? And it contains within the idea of governance. We know that the governance and the legitimacy of the social economic society, we need to have robust democracies. And this is what we're facing today and what we are going to take on with UNDP and CAF. So I want to take advantage of this moment to thank you all for the wonderful work that you're doing and opening up this conversation and making it a reality. And this is exactly what we're doing today. This is necessarily a very powerful work that we're doing in the private sector, in the civil sector, in the government. If we can work together, all of us, it's certain that this common work together is going to generate the changes we need. These efforts must be destined to work in the public field because the capacities of the states, we must avoid going back to this vicious circle, that the idea that democracy doesn't give us anything to eat, that the democracy doesn't work. We have the responsibility to make a new conversation that is completely different. So that's why the work that the UNDP is doing is a level of commitment that's very powerful. And this agenda, we'll probably have something to eat if for those that haven't had their breakfast, but this is a space that we consider our own, and we need to strengthen it. And for us working with CAF, we have worked for 10 years with the leadership, with our leadership. We have created this institution for development with programs and projects and activities. And we had to make it work, and we did. And all of this is going to lead us forward to what each of us is going to have to develop. We have, for 20 years, been working in South America and all the different countries. There are a lot of countries that are coming on board, like Honduras. And our directors accepted these new countries in this process of change. This really means a greater effort on everybody's part. And I want to thank UNDP and all the people involved within this framework. And it's a work that's something that we have to internalize. It's because when you're governing, it's always about what has to be done. And we stop seeing about the future. We have to look on the long term. We have to create that space and take care of the present problems as well. We have to do it now. We always live in the now, but we have to learn to look forward. And with UNDP, we have that possibility. For, for example, es- we had a meeting in Cartagena with all the public banks with more than 500 attendees. We had from Lima, all the different countries. We were uh, addressing financial and social economic situations, and we were able to develop and talking about the development of peace, justice, and equality. And
We were in Santiago de Compostela, in Madrid as well, cooperating with the Spanish government and the European Union. We did have a very important agenda to give the voice to Latin America and the Caribbean in international arena. We had the European Union finance ministers trying to make it more visible any problem in Latin America in the framework of this dialogue. Michelle was present in one of the events in the master um, um, event, in the master class that had a lot of repercussion. It was a lot of dialogue and new approaches were taken, and then and there it was mentioned the situation of the SDGs and how we have to do to make a new click that will get them working and get him on. That this is what we heard in this conference. And I'm saying it was extremely important, that participation, because it made crystal clear that there's no time to waste. We are in crucial moments. We really must engage. We need to commit uh, twice, three times the levels we've done so far, because otherwise it will become a huge frustration for mankind. We still have the time to do that. We still can catch up. And Michelle mentioned that. Those of you listening in the broadcasting, we know that we are the generation who need to take responsibility for this transformation to make change possible. If we do not do so, our children, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren will be paying the toll for our inaction. And this is why, and I'd like to quote what Pope Francis says: we're not alone. We're all on the same boat, and nobody should be left behind. I think it's a common work we need to do with CAF, UNDP, and I'm sure this new alliance, this strengthened alliance with Michelle and all of the CAF and UNDP teams, we can clearly make the leap forward, the qualitative leap forward that is required in the future for a more social, inclusive, fair society that will foster social and human development. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchas gracias, vicepresidente. Aprovecho para hacer un
Thank you, Vice President. I'd like to invite all of you people listening to us, be actively involved on hashtag Conferencia Gobernanza, and please follow the at Agenda CAF at PNUDALC in Facebook, former Twitter, and Instagram. So, effective governance is a crucial priority for the development of Latin America and the Caribbean and achieving the SDGs. And yet, the current situation in our countries is characterized for a significant lack of social and political certainty, whereby we have structural lack of effectiveness, inefficiencies, climate crisis. So in this context, in terms of governance, we need to be more collectively making efforts. So how can we possibly prepare to improve policies in research in terms of governability and governance, how we can build better institutions in our country? In order to respond to all of these questions, we will have a high level dialogue moderated by Isabel San Malo, former Vice President and Foreign Minister of Panama, um, dealing with this type of strategies. So we are going to invite all of the panelists to get up here with us. We have Laura Chinchilla, former President of Costa Rica. Please, madam, come and join us. Jorge Castañeda, former Foreign Minister for Mexico. Susana Malcorra, founder of GWL Voices and former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Worship of Argentina. Gerardo Munk, Professor of Political Science, University of Southern California. Now, our moderator, Isabel, she's had more than 20 years experience in consulting and development of policies in Latin America. She was the first woman to be elected vice president in Panama. She started her career at the Foreign Affairs Department and on the permanent mission in the UN in New York. She's been working with the UNPD in Panama, occupying different posts, managing programs, leading teams, designing and implementing the Panama 2000 agreement, whereby the authority governing the canal was set up. She was founding member of the Directive Executive Women in Panama, Global Initiative in Panama for the Social and Economic Forum, and she is member of the Cali Initiative in Panama and the Arte Institute. So welcome all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Let's start the panel.
A todos, qué gran placer poder compartir con este panel de lujo.
Good morning. This is an excellent panel and an excellent audience. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you for introducing and thank you for this new setting. I'd like to underscore that today we have the first yearly governance of Latin America and the Caribbean. Today is the very first, so it's very important. And last but not least, I'd like to also mention a couple of things that I thought it were very important. The central role, crucial role of governance as a key element for human development and the challenges that we're facing in Latin America. No time to waste. Clock is ticking. Again, our panelists, some of them, they don't need introduction. Former President Chinchilla, Public Security of Costa Rica, the first woman who occupied that post in 1998. In 2006, she was vice president, and then she also was chairing the Ministry of Justice, and she was the first woman to be elected as president of Costa Rica. Also, in her political career, she's been working as consulting for institutional reforms. She's been part of the Advising Council for Human Development of UNDP, and she's been cooperating in governance, consulting of the initiative Governance Beyond Recovery that it was carried out by UNDP during the pandemics of COVID-19. Let's continue with Jorge Castañeda, former Foreign Minister of Mexico, also independent candidate to the presidency of the Republic in his country. He has been a professor at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. He's now, the chair at New York, member of the Academy of Arts and Science and American Philosophy of Science, and is also member of the Governance Board of Human Rights Watch. He's part of the network of experts on democratic governability and human development in UNPD and effective governance. A couple of years we started with this initiative. Susana Malcorra, she's the president and founder of GWL Voices for Inclusion, a very active agenda on equal rights for both genders at the public school, for global affairs in Spain as well. She has been former Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2015 to 2017 in Argentina, also Secretary of the Cabinet for her country in the UN. She has also had a private career in the political arena. Susana was also participating in this process of effective governance, referendum, and consultants. Gerardo Munk, last but not least, he is a professor of the University of Southern California. His latest publication include Thought in Latin America, Social Sciences, and Intellectual People in Changing Times. He was part of the team who prepared the program of the UN for Development and Democracy in Latin America for a wholly inclusive democracy, and the second regional report prepared by UNDP and OEA and Democracy in 2010. He has been cooperating extensively with UNDP. Gerardo, we're going to start with you. Michelle and Christian are telling us that we are hereby kicking off a series of conferences, and we're going to place discussion around democracy and governance once again on the floor. Organization, intermediation, and representative, the plurality in policies are crucial for democracy. Political parties should be acting collectively to channel energies. Recently, we've seen in Latin America and the Caribbean region a given trend to be against rather than for. This is an exercise that the citizens in general are doing, and this shows a general degree of lacking of satisfaction, insatisfaction in the population. How do you feel that the public function and the exercise of power has evolved in the common welfare of the region since the publication of the study on the quality of democracy in the region? In this regard, do you feel that democracy and their institutions of democracy have become stronger or have become weaker in the political arena? You have the floor. Thank you very much, Isabel. For sure, we're going to be talking about many issues related to democracy. Let us start on a positive note. A lot of positive things exist around democracy, and I want to stress that in the 80s and the 90s, there was transition in the region in the year 2000, with the exception of Cuba. The whole region was democratic. Ever since then, generally speaking, with a few exceptions, democracy has been kept active. Some countries in the 20th century never had democracy and now have been for more than 20 years enjoying democracy. Some countries did have democracy. Brazil, Argentina now are having longer democratic periods than they had before, but they had breaks in democracy. So if we take a look at the elections and what is happening around, people are definitely going to get to the power through election. There is quite frequent alternate position of political parties. Important measures have been taken to include women for female inclusion. If we start from 1990, 5% of women were in Congress and Parliament. Now is above 30%. So we make huge progress in some things. That's the positive note. It's the first time in Latin America history that we can say the true challenge is to boost the existing democracy, that it might be imperfect, but it's good enough to make it stronger and better. And also something that we heard before from president speakers, in order to produce what the citizens are demanding in terms of security, inclusion. I think the door is open. We need to find the mechanisms within democracy to strengthen those tools and mechanisms. I'll talk about the representation crisis later. We need to pave the way to improve democracy and to make it stronger and more robust. Let us now take the not so positive side. We need to be facing those things that do exist. Some of those issues are important. In the previous decades, some governments grew really strong. They started to colonize, so to say, a number of institutions in the state. And then when they got weaker and weaker, this is what happens with elections. When they get weaker, they started to use repression. Repression against people, intervention, political banning, I mean, driving away democracy. I'm thinking about Venezuela, Nicaragua. Those are clear, standing examples that we need to tackle in democracy. Now, let's see the modern, the contemporary situation. We are following with great concern the situation in Guatemala. Great challenges, attack to democracy, huge problems. Some trends are appearing, like, for instance, in Salvador, the president is not accepting the institution. Those notes show a trend that could be moving forward and generating bigger issues. Now, if we take a wider scope and think about the region, some democracies are low quality democracy. This is what politologists talk about. We're talking about a crisis of representation, and the political parties and the leaders are promising, they run campaigns, and then there's a problem, a huge problem that can be examined with the states in Latin America. They are not able to overcome the problems. You promise, people feel disappointed, they don't feel represented. And if we took a look at the last decade and what happened in the commodities arena and what happened later from commodities and COVID, in the commodities arena, when the government were in good health, 44% of the elections were won by the opposition. Governments were more or less strong. And then in the past 10 years, the opposition won 78% of the elections. There's a huge wear and tear of the governments. We can tell. We can tell, as you said, people are not voting for, are voting against. And there is no alternate holding of power. And this is not positive. The more often this happens, the more frustration occurs. The government are no longer representing the people. And then we're talking about populism, looking out for different type of solutions that are not the solutions that the people want. If no answers are given and provided by democratic institutions, there's some risks we are encountering and threaten democracy. If you were to ask me, do you believe that the future of democracy is guaranteed? Well, it's never guaranteed, number one. But number two, I'd say I am more doubtful now when it comes to responding to that question than I would have been 10 or 20 years ago. If no answers are given, if no responses are given nationally and internationally in view of the situation and the support to some extreme political sign governments, if all of this keeps going, there's a lot of promises that would be unfulfilled in Latin America. Thank you so much. Well, that was an extraordinary scenario that you set up here to start talking about this reflection with Madam Chinchilla. A number of high-level consultations were taken to analyze governance and what was happening during pandemics and how to respond and recover, looking for better and more fair new normal, as we used to call it. 8 principles were adopted regarding inclusion and sustainability. One of the things that was concluded then and there is that if we came out of the pandemics with no clear parameters to reinforce governance, then we would be losing out on opportunities. Now, the question is, bearing in mind we're still recovering from pandemics and that we've seen how the dialogue spaces are undermined, do you believe that we are kind of not rising to the opportunities? How is the region in Latin America and the Caribbean recovering, bearing in mind the impact of pandemics? Thank you, Isabel. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you, my dear friends, and people who are very robust and great experts in this dialogue. I'm very thankful, particularly thankful for the fact that these um, two bodies, UNDP and CAF, are really hitting the nail on the head. So let me respond about governance and how is the snapshot that we are perceiving after pandemics having made those reflections. I'd like to raise a more general issue here. There is an equation, and whereby we have three ingredients, and this variable that is becoming more and more depending on these three ingredients is democracy. And because never before this was depending on this ingredient. So is this cocktail of ingredients. And now referring to crisis. Crisis not just as an exception, but as part of the new normal. This is something that the reports from UNDP have been warning us about regarding what happened in Lagos. A new concept of crisis has come up. Overlap crisis, making it even more and more complex. And this overlapping crisis will become the new normal. And a new set of elements have appeared on seeing impact on international trade and lack of stability, increase of debt, tax, macroeconomics, and all of that. It's coupled with structural crises that are like kind of seismic, like earthquakes occurring in the changes of democracy. And precisely those crises that are ongoing and never stop and will need to continue managing these ongoing crises. And a new element comes into place, which is the crisis of values. The fear as an installed feeling in most of the population, generally speaking. 6 out of 13 citizens feel average level of fear. So when we think about the pressure of crisis and how all of this is having an impact on democracy, well, the level of pressure is huge. And I'm saying this because we will have to learn to discuss and talk about democracy, providing more content to it. It's not enough to tell the citizens democracy is all about a set of rules, a set of means, allowing coexistence in a civilized manner. That's not enough. We'll have to tell the citizens that democracy has to be effective to overcome crisis and to reduce that level of fear, which is not happening today. I'm saying this because, particularly in the case of Latin America, we are now suffering the consequences of this crisis that are really devastating in our region. And the level of fear is so high that we are now questioning democracy as the most effective system to solve problems. So we have this 30% of Latin America citizens who say, I don't really care if it's democracy, whatever you may call it. I want my problems solved. I want to be a human being, fully provided with all of my rights. So that said, in this post-pandemic arena, what we see is undermine governance. It's not more autocracy, but we see weaker and weaker democracy. All indicators do point out there was a slight improvement in perception in 2021. It would appear that the citizens did acknowledge the efforts made by the governments, but then we went back to the previous situation and becoming more skeptical. So I'd say that we've seen three types of problems and issues, three trends that appear really clear at the moment in terms of governance. There is a trend for increasing attack on authority by the judiciary, which was not happening before, other than in situations like Nicaragua or Venezuela. Clear cases: Brazil, Mexico, Guatemala. Openly, the state and the administration is criticized by the judiciary. So we need to be very careful. I mean, as Gerardo was saying, Latin America has achieved this democracy on the election side, and we are facing a new type of threats. Governments that are interrupted, presidencies that are weakened, like in Peru. We have crisis after crisis, and now we have Ecuador. And these two governments, they made legitimate effort, and yet we see that the governments become weaker and weaker in the framework of polarization, like Colombia and Chile. We also see that this leadership of populism, divisive strategies are coming up, like Argentina. And I'd like to add a final note of concern in the past few months, and I will elaborate a little bit more in the second round of question, which is criminal governance phenomenon. Is no longer undermine democracy, but we're starting to see clear signals, what we could call criminal governance. So the criminal phenomenon linked to organized crime becoming a political phenomenon of great weight. And these actors become political actors. And once they are political actors, some of the leaders, not knowing or ignoring the basic rules of the rule of law, the administration of justice is undermined, and measures go from negotiation and concession of power to those groups, from the judiciary trying to strike a kind of mafia type peace setting. All these leading sometimes to declare war. And we have examples in Mexico, Salvador. So I would say that this is this situation as I see it today. I'd like to leave the floor now to Susana with a couple of comments that Gerardo and Laura said. Can we say that the institutions in the regions are not responding to the citizens? And Laura is talking about undermine democracy and governance. Susana, now talking about 2030 agenda and the SDGs, and what Christians and Michelle were saying about the relevance of all of this effort and in governance towards complying with the SDGs. I'd like to ask you, what do you think is happening in the coming years for this compliance of SDGs in the region? How do we relate governance with this transition towards SDGs? And if you could also elaborate a little bit about challenges, opportunities, and all of these new elements: digital, green, energy transition. Thank you, Isabel, for this wonderful opportunity to participate in this discussion that is so relevant for the world, I'd say, not just for the region. This is something that we need to stress. These are not just issues in the region, they are issues in the world, starting with Europe, with this country as well, and particularly on the reality of our region, where there's a high level of insatisfaction. I was privileged to be actively involved in the 2030 agenda with the Secretary General. One of the things that it was incredibly important and the Agenda 2030 brought about was SDG 16. Up to Agenda 2030, never ever there has been a link between human development and institutionality, the institutions. The rule of law, as we say in English. And it was a great discussion happening. There was a lot of reaction against it from many sectors against SDG 16. But finally, SDG 16 is there. And it's there because truly and effectively, what ended up as a conclusion of this back and forth is that it is impossible to reach development without a solid level of institution presence. So I think this should clarify and leave behind any kind of doubt regarding the link between appropriate governance and development. And yet, we see that that's not the case. So, one of the greatest intention in Agenda 2030 was for Agenda 2030 to become the guideline for the countries to have a long-term vision materializing in the election system, political parties, and the yearly budget. So the design of 2030 agenda was not just about theory, but it was about implementing into practice the political alignment that can be formulated in different approaches, but the structural target is the same. And this didn't happen. Of course, we are still in 2030 agenda discussion, but we are not making Agenda 2030 the core of our discussion, thus getting us closer to the outcome that is desired. In this regard, I think that some of the interruptions, eruptions, and aspects that have taken place are of great impact. Historically speaking, democracy has been implemented through political parties. I think that is a total disintermediation of political parties today, so the citizens are directly connecting to the issues of concern in politics through the media, social media mostly, thus creating echo chambers where we just people who are of the same ideas get together, listening to what you actually want to listen to, and then the social divide occur. There's something really new. And for me, it is of essence. And political experts will confirm as to how we would face this reality, this new reality. The second reality we are living today is that in many places, democracy is associated to election. And that's just the first step to democracy. So, not being able to respond to the citizens with tangible answers, the citizens feel disappointed, and through these echo chambers of people who think alike, they are listening to this mermaid singing and promising solutions for our problems that are extremely difficult because of the complexity of all of these overlapping crises. So I think the institutions and democracy do require a new approach, a new revisiting through all of these elements and factors. How to do so that we can face these new processes, the new climate change, green transformation, technology transformation, all of that is opportunities. They are opportunities for our region so that our region in the green transformation can hold possibilities that can make the difference for the world. So, to take advantage of these differences that we have, we need to be able to design a vision for the future in common, because this doesn't happen overnight.
The democratic goals are just aiming for short term, that they would change things every 2 years. But how can we achieve these opportunities that we will give way to the green and the capacities that we have in the regions that can really be transformational into concrete projects? We must have a long-term impact. And this goes against the brokenness in the regions. If we don't come together in all the countries, in the regions, total in all the regions, basic objectives that open the way to, that all of us are going to offer our part to, but that everybody are looking towards the same goal, it's going to be very difficult to materialize and bring these opportunities to reality. And that the people feel that they really are useful. And they don't see it just in a dimension of these things can be resolved in their complexity in reality, in long and medium terms. And my final comment is what CAF is doing with UNDP is a very good example. We can't do this alone. This has to happen together. And it has to happen at the level of the countries, the regions, and the institutions that are offering to the regions. I want to bring out one of the subjects that you brought out now. The question that I want to say to Jorge, that the politicians have stopped being intermediaries. I have been recently participating in some electoral campaigns. And I saw campaigns and candidates that arrived at the position through the social media. So, Jorge, you are a communicator and analyst in your region, and you're permanently present. What's your perspective about the social media and the news? As everybody has said here, that the countries in South America are more divided than ever. And how does this relate to the social media? How can we confront this polarization? How can the regional organizations integrate to recognize the importance of communication? You are completely right about this, Isabel. This kind of encounter can be very useful to bring people who in Latin America don't usually talk to each other. This is a very real problem. It wasn't that it was idyllic previously and that we were all English lords. And then after a debate, a ferocious debate at the Parliament of Lords, we would go and have lunch together as if nothing had happened. Or as it was before previously in the United States, there was a similitude between the statesmen and the senators. And they were educated and civilized and correct. But I don't think it's ever been that way. But anyway, in Latin America, there are sectors that don't talk to each other. And this is one of our greatest challenges. As in UNDP and CAF can be so useful to be able to recruit these sectors and bring them together. The first point. The second point is there is some regulation in social media. It's a challenge everywhere right now and in Latin America. If there would be a strengthening of the traditional news media, but we find ourselves in a very dangerous position because the traditional news sources have less and less incidents. The people do not receive their information through the television anymore. I was speaking with a Chilean friend the other day. There is only one main newspaper in Chile that everybody reads. In one of the countries of the greatest education and literacy. And they're just information sources of gossip or whatever, but there are actual informatic campaigns going on that use social media with great success. They're very efficient and they are not regulated. And I understand the complexity and the dangers of this. It's nothing simple, and it's an enormous problem for whatever you want to call it. It's an enormous challenge in the United States and in Europe, and it's growing. And it's a challenge for all of our countries because our regulatory capacity is diminishing. So there's a great challenge before us, and there is not a great short-term solution to it. In certain instances, maybe not national or international, there need to be places where we can bring people together within each country in the 25 different countries. We have seen regional groups flourishing over the last years. The only people that like each other and that are of the same opinion come together. And this is a reflection of social media. People just listen to or watch the same things that they believe in. And they don't unite the different, all the people all over Latin America that think and believe the same things get together. And so these regional discussions could be so useful to bring people together who are of different opinions, who normally don't speak to each other, who normally would reject these type of discussions. But the institutions like these ones here, you could say, well, here's somebody that I really don't like. You can't, if it's an institute with a certain prestige, with a certain vision, it's not so easy to say no. So we're going to do a second round of questions now. And the pleasure it is to hear of these panelists. I'm going to ask you, the wonderful panelists, to be brief and in the next round of questions. So, because I would like to give space to the public to bring up their concerns. Laura, you spoke after your first point about the security in Latin America. And we are looking now at the subject of synthetic drugs, the gangs that are growing. What do you think the impact of this organized crime is on the electoral incidents in South America? How can we find focus on solutions to confront these different issues? I want to talk about security. This is something that we have not been able to solve in Latin America. Particularly, it begins, it's destabilizing cultures and countries that were emblemic and historically secure, such as Ecuador. They have been murdering candidates to the presidents. Costa Rica is going in the same direction, which is difficult to believe. This type of approach is putting the institutionalization in danger. We are obliged to feel alarmed from Colombia to Mexico and Central America, and the insecurity that this generates, and the other risks that are threatening democracy. It's not only the citizens. The democracy is not able to even minimally solve these social rifts. And people think they're not even giving this to me in a basically. And the most autocratic leaders are giving very attractive solutions to the people's problems. So we have an enormous responsibility to deal with this. It, looking at the leadership, some leaders say, I don't want to have anything to do with this problem. I just want to get over with it. There are violent deaths and criminal groups, but they don't fundamentally involve me. And we see the criminals at the level of political leaders. They are controlling the tax system. They are controlling the candidates. They're controlling the social economic situation. In the situation in South Salvador is absolutely not sustainable. The scale and the theme of narco traffic, they keep on closing their eyes to the whole hemispheric issue. If we need to organize these scenarios, we need to take these to hand. The, 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 the cocaine and the opium and the illegal drug issue all through the whole hemisphere is there, Isabel, we have a very large challenge. And
Y si
What do you say, Laura, about organized crime? And my country, we've been discussing about this, is obvious. The presence of money from drug trafficking in the political arena. And we need to talk about the cost of campaigns. For sure, there's a space to discuss there. Also, Laura, you talked about Ecuador. And on top of that, we saw all of the candidates wearing bulletproof waist. I mean, that was incredible. So, Jorge, please tell us about Guatemala. There were elections recently. The current prime minister, the president said he will accept transition to the elected president. The President Lula said yesterday in the General Assembly there's a fear about all of this situation in Guatemala and the outcome of it. What is the role that institutions are playing? How robust are institutions in the democracy? You're talking about bullet proof, and President Arevalo was wearing a bulletproof vest and is no longer elected candidate and is still wearing this bulletproof vest, and he's used to danger. So if he's wearing a bulletproof vest, it's because people have to think that there's a real risk. Then, just starting by then, there's a risk, there's a huge risk that in this period of time, in this long transition period, in extremely long in Guatemala, even longer than Mexico, in this period that has been so long, it's like an eternity. And there are risks, physical risks. There's also the risk that Laura was mentioning of attack, of questionings against elected institutions. And this started even before the elections in Guatemala. There was, it became more intense between the two rounds. And this is what happened in Brazil, kind of thing. In the US, of course, I mean, questioning the government, the elected government, the institutions, on just questioning of the election systems that are still active in Guatemala after the Arevalo um, election. So if we add to this election crisis a number of barriers and obstacles for this actual installing in power of the president. There's a huge risk. What can we do? Well, Guatemala people need to fight to defend their election system, their judiciary. It is up to them to make it work. But in Mexico, in our case, we are neighbors and we are, important neighbors. There's a lot of synergies in our countries, crisscrossing countries. And I think Mexico and the Latin American community, through the institutions that we may have, whatever we do have, we should be particularly careful and concerned about what is happening. The OEA, the Commission for Human Rights, CELAC, I never really understood whether they support one side or the other, but that would be, we're going to have another discussion for reinforcing CELAC. Okay, well, I think it's definitely worth it for all of these institutions to be actively involved. It's not easy for this to be solved between Guatemala citizens and nothing else. We need further support. I mean, we've had this institution for more than 70 years. Thank you, Jorge. Those thoughts take me, Susana, to go back to the regional arena. In this regard, I'd like to hear your opinion in this global context of high economic volatility that Laura was defining. This undermining of policies and this lack of growth, economic growth. How do you see what are the possibilities for getting closer both sides of the wall? How can we get people united in more dialogue? Well, Latin America was always very strong in terms of regions, in terms of institutions, and there was a huge participation in global governance through UN. Historically speaking, the weight of Latin America and the Caribbean region in UN was huge. Now, these differences, these little ad hoc groups of opinion that share a view and then they change their mind overnight, has brought up a huge variety of options that are not at all doable. Number one. And number two, lack of power of the institutions that have not been working so far, the traditional institutions. Of course, OEA, there's a huge divide
o imposibilita mucha acción de la OEA.
that makes it difficult for them to be active. UNASUR, again, another example where inaction is the rule.
En la medida
All of it is the very same thing. If we are getting away from ideology, if we're getting away from a close interest and ignoring the general common well-being, governance in capital, if we don't do that, it would be very difficult for the institutions to play the role they need to play, to make contributions. It's very difficult as a region to make contributions. I think we need to go back to be important, to be united, to follow the basic principles. That would be a good step forward. I'm just waving the flag of warning. We need to increase participation of citizens and include more women in the arena. I think we women tackle problems in a different way. I mean, I'm probably overgeneralizing, but when we are able to include everyone in these governance spaces and dialogue, maybe this is an opportunity to open up spaces for dialogue. That's what we are badly needing. I'm calling for these new voices, for this role of women to be more actively involved. Thank you, Susana. This takes me to the last question for Gerardo. We want to respect time. We want to listen the audience at 10:30, and we want to have the opportunity for the panel to respond in the next 20 minutes.
Michelle y Cristian empezaron esta...
Gerardo, Michelle opened the conference today, inviting us to work on dialogue, announcing, strengthening the capacity of dialogue in the region, governance. Today is we are starting from scratch. We are starting on this conference on this new strengthened role of governance. If you were to make a recommendation to Christian and Michelle about specifically how to handle this type of dialogue, who should be the stakeholders, what methods, how to be innovative, how to talk about something that we've been discussing for a long time, over and over. I mean, it is unsolved, and on top of that, we've gone back on it. What would be your recommendation, Gerardo? Something general about reports. I participated in the 2004 report and in the second report in 2010. The initiative started from the Regional Bureau of Latin America. Elena Martinez was the director. Dan de Caputo from Argentina was the director. We really work on that with Guillermo. So the proposal at that time, and is still valid, is to think about what are the distinct singular features of Latin America. We have models in Europe, we have different possibilities, but something makes Latin America different. We have unique features. We have weak states, a lot of inequalities. So the big paradigms in Europe do not rule our world in Latin America.
Y yo creo que eso es lo que se plantearon.
And we need to think about these differences. And if we were to produce reports, many things have changed. And all of these are crucial factors. Who are the actors? Who are the protagonists? Politicians, businessmen, trade unions, the academia, all of these people, media, social media, they play a very important role. The young people are now starting to walk the walk. But as Jorge said, in Argentina, we talk about a divide. Some people just don't talk to one another. And I think the UNDP and CAF can make up a space for dialogue for those people who do not talk to one another, to start talking, to start discussing, to generate a climate of inclusion. There will always be disagreement, that's for sure. But I think the method is dialogue. We need to make proposals, make it happen, conversations. And we're doing very tight for time. So I'm thinking about democracy, state, economy. I was brought up in dictatorship in Argentina. So what kind of democracy? What kind of values? I don't even have it in my mind. But I think the young people have not appropriated that. They don't own that concept. We have different ideas. So why should democracy be valued? And what is the difference with other systems? This is something that is probably a new element for some young people. A lot was said about the short term and in politics, and we see the role of state. If there's problem with organized crime, that's something the state needs to be actively involved. We need to revisit and rethink what kind of state and governments we want to tackle organized crime and to implement the necessary changes. Now, economy. A lot of reaction is to the outside world, but we need to have more strategy inwards in Latin America. What are the pros and cons? What are our opportunities? I don't see that happening right now in Latin America. And those are areas where we can make contributions. People who are back and forth discussing this, and we should be more focused on our uniqueness, our singularity. Stop fighting, changing the backdrop, and become more civilized in general. That would be my think and not react. Interesting what you said. Think about it. Design something, not simply reacting to what we don't like. Kicking off dialogue, starting a conversation. That's something that we really need to do. We want to hear the audience. We want to leave the floor to at least a couple of questions. Anyone can help us with a roaming microphone for questions in the audience. Over there, the lady has a question.
Si las preguntas son cortas y las respuestas también.
Short questions, short answers, more than one question. Thank you. It was very enlightening what we heard. I'm thankful for the ideas. It's not really a question, it's a comment regarding governance in Latin America and the Caribbean. We cannot forget the indigenous peoples. They are important actors. We should call upon them. They are part of the country. They are not civil society. They're not minority group. They are indigenous peoples as such. And they make huge contribution to governance and dialogue. I'd like to open the space for intercultural dialogue. I'd like to hear the indigenous peoples and their voices. They make huge contribution. They've been fighting to defend their rights, their resources, their territories. And today, This is precisely there where the organized crime is acting, killing them. Thank you so much. The role of indigenous peoples. Okay, one more question. Let's answer, and two more questions. The gentleman over there. Good afternoon. Well, good morning, rather, in New York. I have a question about the young people. As you know, in Latin America and the Caribbean, in Mexico, some young people are starting the political career in Dominican Republic too. How can we possibly provide intergeneration spaces for the young people so that we can benefit from their knowledge and repair the establishment, not radical changes, but just improving? That would be my question. Thank you. Any of you, would you like to respond about indigenous people, the young people, and then two more questions? Who would like to start? Susana.
Definitivamente el punto que haces es central.
Your comment is crucial. Any dialogue aiming at setting up common spaces, of course, requires the engagement and the involvement of everyone, and the indigenous peoples are part of it. Probably we were not emphasizing that enough, but it is a simple question. That's my answer. Intergenerational dialogue. President, would you like, Prime Minister, would like to? Yeah, it is something one cannot help, which is to just focus on what really hurts, where the shoe hurts, and not to stress the positive things about that situation. And in our region, it's very common. It's how to mobilize society. This is increasing, and we should not take a look at that as a threat to democracy. It could become a huge opportunity, could become great for us. Um, Regarding segregation and data that we have in the Latin barometer, we see that people in a high percentage are responding to the fact up to 80% that there was always changes in Latin America. So this is the rule, that's the standard situation, regardless of what the elections are and how they unfold. Changes and transformation was the word in our countries. In 2015, 2017, I thought, well, there's no more changing, that's it. And yet, Venezuela people were still voting, trying. But the important thing is when you detach this percentage of those who say, I will always vote, there's 40% who says, I'm voting, but I'm protesting. And this is where we come to this situation of representation of the young sectors and the minorities, like the indigenous peoples, LGBTQA+, women, all of these groups. There's a clear message. Um, this politics between elections. It's not just all about elections. I vote and I want to be included. I want to participate. I want to be a member of society and my community. And this is where we can actually focus in terms of reforms, not just think about democracy and representation. We want a space. The former presidents are always present, but we can do it with digital technologies. And we have examples in our region. I do believe that we can give it a huge opportunity to democracy to make it more legitimate.
Tomemos dos preguntas más.
We have a few more questions, and these two people over here on the right. No, that's fine. This person in the front is fine. Can you hear me well? I wanted to say that at least in Chile, that's where I'm from, most of the camps of the illegal movements are mostly women. The the it's something very cursive, but the WhatsApp groups, it's really the women who participate more in these groups. But as we go up higher in the ladder of power, that it seems that the women at the community level have more power. But these opportunities are reduced as you climb up the social and political ladder. I need to how can we include these questions? How can we include the young people and the women? I want to thank Casia Penuria and thank you from on behalf of all of us. I have a question for Jorge. There's two questions in one. There is a consensus in several of these points. There are new problems that aren't just from Latin America. There are liberal democracies that are European as well. And in Hungary or Poland, there are sanctions, but it's not limited just to Latin America. We have the enormous problems that we see in Latin America. But the question is another thing. Without making enormous criticism to the traditional narco trafficking, what we are left with is institutional sustainability. There is always the political responsibility and the people that are in charge in the government. And there's always an external vision to politics. The politicians in South America receive reports and they hear, they participate in discussions and groups. But if they would give us time to actually listen to us, my first question is there no responsibility to the public opinion and intelligence in Latin America? In the legitimization of politics that could be converted into a logical economic discussion? It seems quite foolish. And the second question is, in the last 30 years, is the relevance. The political relevance is always reduced. We have men or women in the region. What is the legitimacy of and the process that can help us? These two questions, I would like to answer the first about the women. One or two of the women here are really have been spokespeople for the women. We have to change the culture. That's what's necessary. We have changed laws, but at the end, the people vote, and their decisions are based on their cultural opinions. And this is a very slow process. It's changing towards better, it's improving. Inspiring the younger women and the more liberty that they have. This is a constant battle to have equal gender rights and all of these things. And this happens in political campaigns as well. The oh, the oh, they are monitoring all of the information and the data regarding these subjects. And this is a work that needs to be done all together with men and women that offer solutions to this problem. And it's something slow, but it's progressing in a positive direction. I wanted to make a comment, but about the slowness of this process. How does the International Economic Forum say? But we have gone almost 30 years behind because of the pandemic. The inequality around the world. We have gone back. We can't go forward at this rhythm. We're not seeing enough change. There is a pushback, and that's for certain. I think maybe the woman was asking the question of what is the citizen's actual role in all of this? I understood their desire, maybe not the question. This is a sophism that we use inappropriately, that confuses us when we say that intelligence is intelligent. And in many cases, it's really not that way. There is a very strong question being brought up that in many of the Latin American countries, that people are always criticizing, systematically being critical. In one way, that's a way of attracting attention. If you're not in the government and you're not somebody who writes articles or teaches or comes out on the television, well, the people who criticize are the ones that are not being heard. And the second place, as far as the countries, like my country, there is a tradition of subordination of the intelligence and power, and this is one of the ways that people need to express their autonomy. So it generates a dynamic, a generalization of criticism, even within the popular governments. I'm talking about Mexico, but also and other governments that are not a part of this. And I see it in my friends in Chile, and they eat him. They eat the president alive. There's nothing that he can do that's positive. In the popularity, in the laws, in the Congress, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the country, and they won't let him. And it's because the commentosity of Chile, those that are commenting and criticizing, this has created a great issue and a challenge. Because we're not talking just about politics. It does become politics eventually. But people don't pay enough attention to this. Thank you, Jorge. We have only 3 minutes left, and I would like the panelists to express a closing point. The central theme of this meeting is there are the political institutions and the democracy. We believe this is a legitimate system. And the great challenge is that we must produce economic results. If we don't, then people are left with doubts. In political science, we think about democracy as far as um, the people need results. And it's the subject of our state is fundamental. That's the weak point in Latin America. I want to talk about international governance. I think the region has an opportunity now that the political situation is so complicated that the whole region must find balance and unique integration. We have to unite from within. We have to try to unite from within and looking outwards, and to try and create a balance between the different factors, the stakeholders, and each one take on their position and their role and participation. But in the position of the region, so that they are able to influence the large conversations that are taking place. I would go back to the theme of other institutions, and we are invited here today that we call together to this type of dialogue, intelligent dialogue, with representation with young people who want to bring solutions and not sacrifice the confrontation between the different sectors. The indigenous populations who are present today, it's more important. We need to bring the sectors together who normally don't speak with each other. And this will create a greater reaction among the countries. The different groups, the Puebla group, there are the people from the South, from the 77th group, and the other sectors who do not share the same points of view. And the institutions that have the capacity to do this should be the ones to bring them together. And I would give great emphasis to that. I would say that it's not enough to call resilience. The governments in Latin America have to transcend, have the greater projection. We have got to adopt democracy in its content. Otherwise, it's not valid for the people, the common people. We have to find better ways to respect the freedom and the dignity of the people. We cannot have that without focusing on security. It's not enough just to represent the democracy as something that's represented by the voters. We have to live the democracy as a decision-making mechanism and create these state reforms that can then become more efficient. It's very difficult to close here, but listening to the messages, of these extraordinary panelists, And what I take away from this is that the UNDP's proposal is absolutely necessary. And we're talking about the necessity for dialogue within the countries, between countries, in the region, and in the entire region, and between regions. And that's the only way to bring about reforms. Thank you so much for inviting us, and thank you for the panelists for their offerings. And thank you for be able to offer this conversation virtually. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Isabel.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, all panelists. On behalf of CAF and UNDP, thank you so much for your presence today. Thank you for attending. A big, huge thank you to all of you across the world. Everything was recorded, so you can take it back again from www.caf.com. Happy Wednesday to everyone. Bye for now.